So our next guest is Roger Spitz with Disrupting Existence, The Future Me. Roger is the founder of Existential and Disruptive Futures Institute. He's a member of the Association of Professional Futurists, and he is the National Association of Corporate Directors. He sits on several advisory boards of companies, venture capital funds, and academic institutions worldwide. Welcome, Roger.
Fantastic to be with you today. So we're going to fire away and we're going to kickstart on the future me. And we're going to look at what disrupting existence is and why are we even talking about disrupting existence. So it's a great time and inflection point, I think, for the world to take stock and to think about that. And when we think about existence and disruption, both have existed for pretty much quite a bit of time. So if you consider the very difficult events of about 100 years ago, someone who was born in 1915, 1914, by the time they're 30, they would have been through pretty difficult and unimaginable events, right? The global influenza pandemic in 1918 killed 50 million deaths, the 2 world wars, there was a Great Depression, and of course, the first nuclear bomb ever detonated in Japan. So that is very significant disruption, and disruption as a concept is not new. Now, one way I find quite interesting to look at history and to look at how we can slice time in a sense is Heilbronner. Heilbronner wrote a book called Visions of the Future, the Distant Past, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And he slices human history in 4. This book was written in 1995, so today will be 1995. And he looks at the distant past, which was a period of resignation, which was about 150,000 years ago, the prehistorical times, the evolution of the Homo sapiens. And at that point, the future was no different from the past. It was pretty similar, pretty linear. He then gives a second phase to slicing human history as yesterday. So that's 1700 to 1950s. And here there's an optimistic outlook. The future can be better. There's a view that change is starting to be discernible. Science is flourishing. And then he defines today, which again is 1995 for Heilbronner. So that's 1950s to 1995. And he's looking at an era of anxiety and pessimism, a search for meaning. These are the modern times that most of us are sort of familiar with. Capitalism gains control, and the fears and challenges, which are kind of omnipresent and progressing with this way society and technology and things evolve. What I think is quite interesting is the 4th period. Heilbronner spends less time on tomorrow, which is effectively the 21st century. He sees a continued search for meaning in this postmodernist time. But what's interesting is that he believes that capitalism and democracy will be dominant. But the most interesting aspect for me is the concept that humanity will be constant. And so this is where our discussion will focus on debating whether that assumption and that view of the 4th phase of the 21st century of tomorrow, where the concepts of humanity are constant, are valid. I personally believe that today we're faced with the most profound questions around the very fundamental features of our world, about the essence of existence and human life in the not so distant future. And this is really the focus of what we're going to spend, the next half hour or so together with, discussing. And it translates, to my mind, in a number 10 existential questions. We'll cover some of them in our session this afternoon or this morning or whatever time zone you're in. Well, first one is, what is life? What is life when biology, technology, and artificial intelligence fuse? when you can re-engineer life, when you're editing genes, when you're printing biological tissues or organs, and when you can communicate directly between the brain and computers. What is life when the genetic engineering, synthetic biology means that with algorithms, in a way, we're playing God, where technology is allowing us to create inorganic life. And then the same existential questions arise in terms of work, information, what is governance, what is hospitable, what is reality, value, money, what is it to be human, what's technology, what's longevity. So we're going to take this journey together and look at some of these questions. Longevity in its own right, which is by definition intrinsically linked to humanity. How long can or should a human live? Is it 150, 200 years, 300 years? What is possible today as we're moving to an era of genetic engineering, where there are initial breakthroughs and a lot of research and developments around eliminating untreatable genetic conditions? What is a world where AI can predict vaccines and prevent illnesses before they spread? Now, of course, many of us will be cynical with the likelihood of that in a world where we've just experienced and still experiencing the pandemic. But still, don't underestimate the developments in drug discovery with AI. It's actually AI, a Canadian company called Blue Dot, which discovered before the CDC and anyone else that there was actually a pandemic in October or November 2019. And the fact that the vaccine became available within a year and a bit is really makes history. There have been a phenomenal number of developments in terms of vaccines and other things, thanks to AI and drug discovery. And what is it with nanobots and nanotechnologies when you can have medical care living inside your body, replacing body parts and possibly curing with very small robots or machines inside your body? With the Internet of Existence, where you have sensors inside your body connected to the outside world, understanding the dynamics between public health and your own body day to day. And simply, as we mentioned earlier, inorganic life, when gene editing redefines what life itself is and aging. Now, as we're moving towards that, you'll need to think about how do you update life and societal structures? What about money and learning and working and overpopulation in this world? What are the benefits of the intergenerational wisdom, the long-term thinking, and the concept of life and time itself will be completely redesigned? Or if you think about governance, what are countries, governments, and organizations tomorrow? We've all been used to the past centuries, millenniums, of centralized hierarchical control structures. There's unequal access. You have restrictions. Society understands and knows that somewhere there's a country or governance structure which is imposed on most of the majority. What is it like when there's permissionless governance, where there's self-organized, decentralized basis which is governing with no barriers to entry, fewer regulations? There are positives to that. There are many negatives as well. The role of humans and the relationship between humans and technology. And when you have billions of people that can be reached instantaneously, where technology controls the media, where opinions can be swayed instantly, and where the power of people is unequaled maybe by those manipulating them through information. What does that look like in terms of governance? And what is work in a world where anything can be automated, anything can be cognified? Cognified means to be made smarter, more intelligent with artificial intelligence or with software, where everything can be decentralized, digitized, disintermediated, or virtualized. We've seen already over the past 12 months that a lot of this is already reality. This is increasing every day significantly. So these shifts are radically transforming every aspect of the economy, every industry, every sector, every profession, every job, the meaning of work itself. And so when we look at technology, there's a very interesting paper which was written by Stephen Harwood and Sally Eves called Conceptualizing Technology, Its Development and the Future, 6 genres of technology. And the authors, they think about both technology and humans as a complex interacting system, both of whom have some form of agency. Now, what's interesting here is to think about technology having some form of agency. But they go further. They look at these 6 genres of the relationship. The first one is this zero technology. You have just humans, which are interconnected, autopoietic. Autopoietic means that it's the self and that it's the creation, the production. So it's a system that's capable of reproducing and maintaining itself. Humans can do that pretty well. They've been doing it for quite some time. Animals as well. And I personally believe that you don't have anything today which has zero technology, where you only have a human-human relationship. I think that anything that exists today has technology. The second genre is amplified humans. Technology amplifies communication, but they're really using it as an artifact. And then we're more in zone 3 or 4 today, where it's digital shift. Humans use technology as a tool to create new technologies. And we're moving into intelligent machines, where the humans activate technology through technology, but then the humans are withdrawing. In other words, with machine learning and self-coding, more and more we have intelligent machines. The next phase is autonomous collectives, where the technologies are autonomous and interconnected. And the final phase would actually be no human involvement. So the artifacts or the technology is not only interconnected and technological beings, but autopoietic. In other words, they're able to reproduce and maintain themselves. Now that might seem absurd, but if you think about technology and its evolution and machine learning and the fact that it's becoming more intelligent and neural networks, actually we are on our way. We are probably already in intelligent machines number 4. We're starting to see appetizers and teasers, whether we like it or not, of number 5. And number 6, it may not be so absurd. So when we put all that together, we need to think about what language is actually probably the most important language in the world. And it's the language of data. We need to think about Internet of Existence, where every single thing in the world, whether we believe it or like it or realize it or not, is data. That information drives knowledge and gives insights. But today you have biometrics everywhere, from your switching on your computer phone to anything you touch. You have more and more clothes, you're implanted, you're wearing things that are physical, but also biological and connected. Sensors, you can be hacked, just like a computer can. You can be replicated. And so there's a question in terms of what that means, that any human being, any government, anything is relying so heavily on data, which can basically be breached and attacked and distorted. And so these are really areas where data is biting back, because in a way, are we prepared and able to process what it means that anyone, anywhere in the world, a 16-year-old kid sitting in any country in the outskirts of Moscow or anywhere, can basically hack into US government systems, can hack into your body, can hack into pretty much anything, can influence how we might perceive things, and can also interrupt the flow of information or data, which basically means the world stopping. And so as data is biting back, it's evolving and it's moving towards aspects which are what we knew from a few decades ago, which is software eating the world, which is the VC Anderson who coined this term, to say that everything is being digitized, demonetized. So that's basically software, it's computer applications. Everything's being dematerialized and democratized in terms of information. So you can access anything, anywhere, anytime. There's almost no marginal cost to producing that. And you're moving now to the middle box, which is software is eating software. You're in an environment where you have no code or low code. You're in an environment with machine learning and deep learning, where the code is written by the data itself. To our earlier point, not necessarily always needing human intervention. I have very many debates with my niece on this topic, who's also in the Silicon Valley and who's understands these things far better than I ever will and far more clever, but she's a machine learning engineer and she tells me that it's not yet the case. But I like the fact that these discussions yield on the fact that it's not yet the case, because the elements and the signals as to code being written by data are not yet there in an autonomous way, in an independent way, but that is the direction and that is the velocity. And so you're moving to the third phase of data biting back, which is the metaverse eating in real life, where virtual goods and virtual worlds are becoming as important, if not more important than the real world, where a Gucci bag sold in Roblox for virtual money that can't be monetized is being sold more than a real Gucci bag in real life, where 30% of the world population is spending billions of hours every month, billions of dollars every month in a virtual world. And so this is an environment where what I call DEIP, everything is delocalized, experiential, immersive, and personalized, where you have digital synergies between technologies which allow immersion, 5G, Internet of Things, sensors, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, machine learning. And that artificial intelligence is also involving natural language processing, which means that you don't even need physical keyboards anymore. You can just speak and the computers understand. And of course, we all look at Alexa and Google Home, and our assumption is that they don't even understand what the weather is. And therefore, we will assume that Alexa and machine learning is not working, but that's wrong. That's a misinterpretation as to what's happening. Because today, Alexa understands probably not that much, and neither does Google Home. But again, if you look at the velocity and the trajectory, once it goes from understanding 95% of speech to 99% of speech, no one will ever use a keyboard anymore. And then you have artificial reality, which is, are you in real virtual life or are you in virtual real life, where the brain can communicate with computers and where materials technology is having so many fundamental breakthroughs with nanotechnology and holographic materials breakthroughs, that you can basically see, hear, feel, and smell virtually anywhere in the world. So what does it mean in terms of digital teleportation or space travel if you can actually feel, see, hear, smell virtually? What is the difference between science fiction, between science fact? And so this liminal world is one where you have blurred zones between different spaces. Normally liminal or liminality is used to distinguish a blurry zone between two distinct phases. So you enter a phase and then things are a little bit blurred and then you get out and it's a different and new era or phase. What's happening now is that liminal is a constant. What is an agent or its environment? What is in real life or artificial reality? What is natural or artificial, truth or fiction, real or fake? What is authentic or synthetic? What is meat or alternative meat? What is a competitor or partners in different ecosystems? What is science fiction? What is science fact? Home, education, working, retiring, learning, unlearning, relearning. What is human or transhuman? And so this liminal state applies to everything. There are no different phases. There's no normal or post-normal. There are no phases where you just simply get out of this liminal zone. It's permanently blurred. And so this is in an environment where you have, this is the World Economic Forum and the top 10 risks, which they consider to be the biggest risks for humanity. I call them existential risks. But if you look at the left column is the likelihood and the right column is the impact. Half of these are related to the environment, failure of climate action, biodiversity loss. Others are due to human nature, weapons of mass destruction, IT infrastructure that could break down, etc. Digital inequality, social elements, diseases. But these past few years, actually, things like infectious diseases have been top of this list for close to a decade. But of course, humanity ignores these existential risks, as we've seen with the pandemic. And so when we think about the speed of information, the speed of change and what's happening in the world, these existential risks are that much more important and prevalent than they've ever been. So as we think about all this and as we have an eye to the future, one of the biggest things which I think is really a cognitive bias, which as humans, we're not very good at thinking about, is exponential change. And we've all learned exponential change at school. We know the formula, we think we understand it, but actually we don't necessarily have a good sense of processing it. And this illustration is to try and show that if we take, these are 3 lakes, so assume they're 3 lakes with water lilies. So this is based, take the Monet paintings in the Nymphéa in Giverny in France, and think of these as the water lilies, which are growing at 100% rate every day. And think about for 30 days, every single day, these water lilies are growing by 100%, so doubling. And the first little pond on the left, day 1 to 23, actually means that for the first 23 days, even though the water lilies are doubling every day, less than 1% of the pond will be covered. On day 28, 25% of the pond is covered. And then on day 30, it's 100%. But because it's doubles every day, until day 23, you don't notice it. So think back February or March 2020, think about the pandemic. Now project that to technology, project that to everything that is happening at warp speed. The gradually then suddenly is an expression from Ernest Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises. And he had the question in the book to one of the characters, how did you go bankrupt? Gradually, 2 ways I went bankrupt. Gradually, then suddenly. And so actually the way to think about exponential is exactly that. It's gradually, then suddenly. But humans, we have a myopic, a cognitive bias where we think is the world in a linear way. We think about trying to extrapolate and predict as opposed to preparing. We think about growing and incremental as opposed to exponential, and what in technology terms, the power of platforms or networks. And so this increasing rate of change is one which is for real. It's not science fiction. So when you take technology, for instance, when you look at the past few months, you can see, for instance, how quickly things are moving. You can see that 10 years ago, 25% of the world were on internet. The first smartphone was only 2007. By 2018, 50% of the world is on internet. So that's an additional billions of people. When you're looking at the first drug discoveries and antibiotics, they're being discovered by artificial intelligence today. When you look at some of the things that are happening on the moon, or virtual reality contact lens, some company I know here in the Valley called Mojo Vision produces contact lenses which already have virtual reality. So it's not a question of whether virtual reality will be a thing. You already have lenses that you can wear that can detect and see things in a virtual reality world. And for the anecdote, that company, Mojo Vision, has just been accepted on the accelerator of Disney. So you're thinking the future of entertainment, Disney is already projecting a world where you're wearing contact lenses and where you're watching things in virtual reality. So this is the speed with which things are moving. So this end of linear is one where you need to think about a lot of the references we have as linear, which make us human, which is the essence of the existence we know, the 3-phase life versus a 100-year life or modified aging. You need to think about the specializations we have and the specializations we focus on versus having more general, broader knowledge. What is planned, what you prepare for versus what suddenly emerges. So all these aspects are directly linked to what one might see as the end of a linear world. And this arises in a time where not only do you have the convergence between technologies, where you have machines interacting with other machines and cognitive computing, but you have fusion, what I call fusion 5.0, where the machines are becoming intelligent, aware, and social, where you're merging biological with physical and digital. And so this is a context where the environment we're in is what I call beyond complicated. This is the Keynote framework by Dave Snowden, who divides different levels of the environment in terms of features. And we're going to look at the top 2 ones. Complicated is when you can understand the cause and effect. It's where you can rely on experts because you have known unknowns. You have a range of right answers. AI is actually very strong in the complicated zone. And here what happens is that you can rely on these specialist experts. If you want to drill oil outside of the coast of the state of Rio, you can rely on the right kind of engineers to see where in the sea do you drill, how do you extract the oil. Complex, you only understand the cause and effect afterwards. They are unknown unknowns. There are no right answers. You have to develop emergent practices. So that's the Amazon. If you change something, you might not know what it impacts. There are no right answers. You're going to have to test things or be respectful of the ecosystems and that everything is hyper-connected. And so when you look at artificial intelligence and decision-making, artificial intelligence is very good with what we call complicated versus complex, because they are right answers, there's cause and effect. But if you look at what is decision-making and where does artificial intelligence play a role, decision-making is you can detect and collect intelligence, you then interpret it, and then you make and you implement decisions. The initial part is descriptive. You're analyzing data, it's historic. AI is very good with that. And then you're interpreting that. You're looking for pattern recognitions. You're looking for insights to support those decisions. This is analytics. It's what we call predictive. And algorithms are very good with that because there's some degree of predictability. The prescriptive area is where humans have an edge today, where you need to make decisions. What is it that makes decisions human? It's kinesthetic intelligence. It's the timing, the sense. It's what you have the temporal lobe for. It's the emotional intelligence. It's where you use instinct, intuition, self-awareness, consciousness. There are no algorithms that can help for this. You're not using the prefrontal cortex. You're really thinking about navigating and managing this complexity. It's creative problem solving. You're experimenting, testing, prototyping. Now, the consideration here is that when you think about disrupting existence and when you're thinking about what it is to be human, there's a question as to whether intelligence and decision-making and the emotional realm are an exclusivity for being human. Machines are continuing to learn fast and with increasing levels of human functions and understanding. So what domains of expertise, what will it be to be human and to remain human in terms of intelligence? So here we have cut this in four, looking at the value chain of decision-making. Optimization is what historically computers have been very good at, automating very repetitive processes, simple, narrow processes. You then look at augmentation, where you're starting to look at slightly more autonomous intelligent systems, your wealth management, advising your robo-advisor to advise where to put funds, radiology. You're looking at specific domains though. You have predictive analytics, they're recognizing patterns, the algorithms can curate content, trading algorithms, risk reduction. There are a number of things that in terms of decision-making, augmentation is helpful and computers have a key role. Now, we're moving towards hyper-augmentation, where computers and AI is helping with the creativity. And that's wonderful for scientific research and drug discovery. Maybe less so for lawyers when they're helping draft contracts or for musicians when they're composing music or doing dance and choreography. But that is a joint venture. The humans have a role there, and there's content or elements being discovered and created, and there's a joint symbiosis. And today in complex systems, which we looked at earlier, where you need more judgment, where there are no right answers, where there are unknown unknowns, where it's an emergent, this is where the strategic decisions or the decisions human excel at. And so the question which arises, and the real question for me when I look at this is, how do we make sure we stay human and we stay relevant? And how do we make sure that symbiosis with machines and with everything else that's happening is the right one for humanity? We call this a being AAA. And AAA we see as the agility to bridge emergence, and we're going to look at that in a minute. Building that on anti-fragile foundations and with anticipatory preparation. And you need the agency to do that philosophically. And you also need everything to be aligned. And so that is the AAA. Fragility versus anti-fragility. Fragility means that if a shock happens, you get more downside from that shock. Even if it's not very likely to happen, the impact is so huge that it basically creates a problem for you. When you look at anti-fragile, that's where innovation has a role. You get more, you actually get a benefit from the shock. Not only are you resilient, but you even do better from the fact that there was a shock. You thrive on the uncertainty and the randomness. And this is what is required for complex systems. You like errors because you're always testing, experimenting. You understand that there's not causal independence. You understand that there's opacity. You understand that there's unpredictability. And so this complex systems and the fact that the world is more and more complex, or the cost of not understanding that the world is complex is greater today if we get it wrong, means that we need anti-fragile frameworks and foundations. Because if we don't have those, when shocks happen, and they do happen and will happen, things break. And so developing anti-fragility is linked to innovation and linked to thinking and to understanding that the world is disruptive, that there is constant change. And so that is really one of the essential aspects of the AAA. The second one is the agility. And to think about agility, we need to think about what emergence is. Emergence is because we don't know in advance what will happen, because there are too many unknowns. And so we need to receive information, assess, make sense of the environment. And depending on how we react with the environment, what information we get and what happens, we either dampen that feedback if it's negative and not getting us to where we need to, or we're amplifying that. But that is a real-time event that is happening. It is not something you can just rely on experts or your parents or your teacher to help you with. And so I call this mechanism for developing agility emergent and strategic agility. Think of it in terms of a loop. And think of a bridge with 3 sections. On the right, you have the long term. And the long term is, what do you think about for the future? What is the future you aspire to? What is your vision? In the middle, it's short term. It's not now, but it's soon. And it's not as far away as the long-term future. And you're constantly updating information, getting new information. And then there's the emergence, which is the here and now, the present. And one of the hardest things that everyone is struggling with in this more complex world is reconciling between the strategic agility between the long term and the short term, and what I call the emergent agility between the short term and the emergence. And these two are bridges. They are infinite loop bridges whereby they don't stop. You're constantly getting feedback and assessing how you're moving and how you're emerging with that. And even if you're thinking long-term, you're making those decisions short-term now. The decisions you make today are for the future, even though you make them today. And so how do you do that? You have to erase what you know or assume you know or what you're relying on. You need shoshin, which is in Japanese, beginner's mind. This is a calligraphy by a friend of mine, Nai, who wrote shoshin in Japanese, and it's really having the beginner's mind. With the beginner's mind, which is a child's mind, everything is possible. You mustn't judge. You must find your patterns for yourself. You must really listen. You must question everything. You have to be genuinely curious, because you can't rely on there being just answers available. And so that experimenting, that child life, that testing, that prototyping is really a beta version of your life. So when I think about disruption, I don't think disruption is necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I think it's just simply a feature that's actually constant and that's accelerating. I don't think that disruption is a one-off or specific event. It's a steady state. It's a constant. And many philosophies, including Eastern and Japanese philosophies and Zen Buddhism, have that understanding that change is constant. It's only in a world where we're oversimplifying and making assumptions about the world, often a Western world with predetermined views of life, that we feel that anything that disconnects with what we imagine or assume it to be is a problem. But many other philosophies in the world understand that change is a constant. But what is happening is that the fundamental paradigms are increasingly changing. And the impact of these changing paradigms, the impact of the disruption will depend on how prepared you are and the responses, because the impact in a complex world is disproportional to what happens. So something small might happen, but the impact might be huge. And so even though it's a small event or low probability event, in a complex world, what happens is that the impact and the cost, if you're not responding correctly and preparing in the right way, is greater. And this simply means that we've moved from a world of risk or uncertainty to what we call deep uncertainty. Deep uncertainty is a world where you don't know what any of the possibilities might be, and there might not even be a consensus on what these possibilities might be. So think about aware and intelligent machines. How intelligent and how aware are machines going to be? Are they going to be as intelligent as humans, less or more? Will we colonize and commercialize and live in space? It's not a question of just a probability. It's think of how life-changing that would be, and the fact that we don't know if and when that might happen. Think about the consequences of climate change. Are the storms that are taking place and the disrupted weather linked to that? Are they just a small appetizer? Are they just what will become a constant in 1 year, in 10 years, in 20 years? What does it mean if you live in New York or London and the whole city can be flooded? What does it mean in terms of the buildings you need to build? Do you ignore it? What are the questions in terms of healthcare and gene editing that we looked at earlier? What does it mean if within a few decades we can live hundreds of years? So that is deep uncertainty. There are unknown possible future events, and there's not even an agreement of what they might look like. Uncertainty is what most people think of in terms of the world. You don't know exactly the likelihood of the events, but you think you have a handle and there's a consensus on the 3 or 4 possibilities. So that's a question of, will China be the #1 economy in the world? Will there be a pandemic? Will there be an earthquake? That is a specific number of events. You probabilize them, you take a view on them, and there's some uncertainty. And then risk is, if you smoke, what is the likelihood or probability that you might get cancer or what have you? And so as we move towards deep uncertainty, that is the complex environment we live in. And so the reason why I actually think it's a positive thing that there's deep uncertainty is that if you take an existentialist perception of disruption and of the world, and if you think about yourself as agents with freedom and choice, deep uncertainty provides more freedom and choice as long as you exercise the agency and with alignment. So in philosophical terms, if you take existentialist philosophy, for instance, what we call essence precedes the existence means that the world is deterministic. It means that you have a reductionist view, a Newtonian view of the world with certain assumptions where you can predict the future, where you can understand cause and effect, and therefore, that reductionist view, those assumptions are correct and will have a cause and effect. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we live in a world which is complex. In a complex world, I actually see that as a world where existence precedes the essence. It means you exist, you then make choices with the agency you have, and that freedom builds your beingness and your essence. And it's a world which is contingent, where there are choices. And that is actually something where you have more optionality, you have more things that you can do. If everything was predetermined, you have less choice, you have less agency. And so to wrap up, I like to use the analogy of a glider. If you take the female glider here, she needs to keep moving, not to fall. She needs to find the right balance between the weight, the velocity, the weather, the wind conditions. These are constantly updating to avoid the tree, but she has freedom as to where she can glide. She has quite good visibility on things, but she has to be very agile to make the choices here and now to have that control and visibility. If you take the gentleman who's reading the map, who's in the maze, he may not even realize that the maze is changing. He thinks he has a map. He thinks he knows where he's going. The maze might change all the time. Even if he doesn't know what's around the corner. There might be a black swan with unexpected events, or gray rhino, or trees, or wonderful lake, or some amazing things he wouldn't even know. And so really, my closing kind of comment in terms of the theme which our friends Andre and Maria gave for us from Future Hacker, which is disrupting existence, the future me. The future me has to be one with agency, where you exercise the agency with the choices and freedom ahead, understanding that you're not disconnected from the world, understanding that you need to be aligned for things, for you to exercise that agency, understanding that you need to be anti-fragile and have the right foundations in a complex world, that you need to be anticipatory as you think about the future, and that you need the agility to emerge here and now, because the decisions you make today through your agency determine the future. That's it for me.
Oh, thank you, Roger. It's not future me, future us. Very inspiring your presentation. To open another great round of debates, we have Lala Zenhazling. Lala is a futurist pioneer in creative and collaborative economy and creator of 5D Fluxonomy, which combine all these contents. Featuring among the top four futurists in Latin America, she was named one of the 100 women in the world who are co-creating a collaborative future. Lala, the word is yours. Welcome, dear Lala.
To be with you, and it was an amazing presentation, Roger. Really, how you managed to in 40 minutes. It's time traveling experience, and what I find particularly interesting is how you connect things that are complementary. I was thinking that for me, maybe the answer for the question how we can disrupt existence and about the future me, and which I believe is future us, because unless it is future us, there won't be any future me. And the thing is the perception that things are complementary and not opposing. And this was so beautifully put in any of your slides. It was amazing. So how you were always trying to balance things and to give us options. No, not just a list of things happening, but what can you do? It was really interesting. Thank you so much. And a lot of clues, no, on how we can develop our perception, how we can handle these complexities. Super interesting. And as a moderator, I won't talk very much. I would like to invite Ligia Zottini to give your perspective on this theme and what inspired you in Roger's presentation. And please do introduce yourself, because I don't want to be very formal and give your CV or something like this. And then little by little, I'll tell a little bit of what my perspective of how we can become a future us is.
Awesome. Thank you, Lala. Thank you for this invitation, for share a little bit of the future us and me. And I think like Roger's speech was amazing, and I usually love that kind of special slide every single presentation has. And for me, it was this let me see if I speak is right, like Shoshin mind, like the beginner's mind. And I truly believe that all this kind of future me inside of us, it's based on more on the human part than on the technology part. All my research goes around that. And when I see like this beginner's mind, is not because the person is immature and we don't need to give them our chance to understand life, but the way he puts, like, don't judge, find partners, really listen, you know, like explore or feel or question everything and be genuinely curious. I think it's how we start the life, you know, and we used to think that babies and kids doesn't know much, but I truly believe that they know everything because they are pretty connected with the natural state, you know. And I see in all my research that the future is all about getting back to the, not just the nature itself, but the natural, you know, the reconnection of our physical me with the emotional me, and these, you know, invisible energy, I don't know, call the way you call, but we need to integrate this part of the human back to the game. Otherwise, we are going to be only talking about transhumanism, how I'm going to put a sheep or a transplant or an implant, how I'm going to transmit my thought doing or in favor because of I'm using a technology. I think technology is going to be a way to show how much this body is also powerful, because technology have been and has been I don't know, copying and reproducing our capability of doing things in our own human body. So I think the future is more about integrating this capability of being more human, an expanded human, that putting technology to be superhuman. I truly believe that get back to this natural, it's a trend that usually we don't put in the conversation of futurism and technology together quite often. So that's my job.
Thank you. And would you like to tell us a little bit about your research or yourself, since
Oh,
I
sure.
didn't
Yeah,
present
I
you?
inverted. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Ligia Zattini. I've been doing research around future scenarios since 2016. Before that, I'm a mix between a teacher, a professor, a university professor, and a technology executive. But nowadays, I truly believe in futures literacy. And that's what I'm working on. And I founded a platform called Voicers, which is basically this educational digital school that talks about future scenarios and map off integrations of all this new technology, new people, new ecosystems.
Great. And Sylvia, tell us about you and about your perception of how can we disrupt existence.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you so much for having me here on the panel. And thank you, Roger, for I'm amazed by your presentation. It was so deep, brought a lot to think and brought a lot to visualize also. I think that was really a wonderful one. As all of you here, I think the main questions are not just about the technology, but about how to stay human in the future. And I think that's probably what we have in common. So maybe just a few words about my background. I started actually in technology, helping companies on developing technology and entering new market with their technology, trying to find product market fit. So I worked with startups for 15 years, technology startups, really helping between Europe and the US. And what happened is a few years ago, I really decided to become a futurist because we were missing a few things by developing short-term companies or short-term products. So I really wanted to extend my time horizon and help the companies see their products in long-term vision. So I became a futurist. I developed a company which is called Silicon Humanism. And once again, here in the title, you can see that I really try to put humanism at the center. It's really at the crossroad between technology and humanism. So maybe to give you a little my perspective, and I'm sure it will echo with what we heard, because I like the fact that you mentioned, Lala, that it's not just about the future me, but about the future us. I like all the philosophical references you had, Roger. Lydia, I couldn't agree more with how you put the human at the center. So on my end, I truly believe we will live in what I call a technology supercharged world. We see the long trends of acceleration, exponential technologies transform and disrupt our human experience. And now we can start augmenting ourselves thanks to IoT, brain-computer interface. And once again, Roger, I was really interested in the way you presented human tech relationship, not just as binary, but there are like these 6 human-tech relationship. We also see that the metaverse is gaining in importance as a parallel world, but also interconnected with our real life world. And I saw in the comments someone was mentioning someone selling a castle for $1 million in that world. So that world is becoming real and truly interconnected with our real life world. The value of money has the same kind of importance. So we see the same anthropological features that we have in real life being replicated in our virtual worlds. We can also travel further and further. And I think this month we've seen with Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos that we could have dreams, like more concrete dreams of living in space one day. And Elon Musk is really about like not just space travel, but also settling life on other planets and terraforming other planets. But I would say in that future, there are three things that I think, and that's mainly the main thing I would like to underline here. Three things that I think will be at the same time challenged. They will challenge our human nature, but they will also foster our human nature. So I think the first one is a psychological factor with mental health at the core, because a lot of our futurist scenarios have been reviewed in light of the pandemic with another focus on mental health. The future of work used to be all about technology, and now we really replace mental health at the core. Or the home used to be all about sustainability or smart homes or smart cities or smart villages. And now we realize our home or cities are mostly about sheltering from exterior or interior threats, about safeguarding our sanity. And it's the same with space travel. And one of the questions I actually try to ask when I write fictions about this is, maybe we will be nostalgic for our Earth if we live on other planets in the long run, on the long term, because after all, we are not just humans, we are also Earthlings. So there's really a big part of mental health, I think, in that future. And the second thing is the sentient factor. We are sentient beings. We need to have real experience of the world to be able to continue to create VR content or let's say mixed reality material. And when we talk about the metaverse, I like to challenge with the following question, like, how can we relate to the digital version of our experiences if we don't have the first-hand experience of the world? Think about sports, swimming, traveling, or connecting to wildlife, being overwhelmed by the immensity of a landscape and so on, such as the Grand Canyon or Niagara Falls or the Taj Mahal and so on. So we need to have this first-hand experience, I really do believe, to be able to have a digital parallel world. And the third aspect, and then I will give back the voice to you. The third element is philosophical, and we saw it really in our Roger presentation. Thank you so much for the references. Philosophical because from the definition of first philosophers such as Aristotle about being astonished by the world. As a kid, you were mentioning children, they view the world differently, they are beginners. That's exactly what the Greek philosophers were pruning. To existentialism also, you were talking about it, and Eastern philosophy, you mentioned the Japanese philosophy, for example, Roger, but also to moral philosophy. How do we deal with intergenerational justice? How do we set rules and commit towards future generation? How can we keep ethics at the center of scientific and technological progress? What is in favor of our human development and what is actually threatening our species? And once again, as humans, but also as Earthlings in connection to our Earth, to how can we control our human egos and preserve, in a sense, the order of the universe? So that's three things I think we need to take care for in the future: philosophical, psychological, and the sentient factors.
Thank you so much. It's interesting how we converge in this perception that the human part is so important. I was wondering, I always worked with decision making in terms of development. I was always advising in an environment of how can we solve very complicated and complex problems. And one thing is, though we as a futurist, we can see beyond, we really see beyond. It's very interesting. I use the metaphor of dimensions. Now, if we imagine a being that is two-dimension, no, flatlands. This is a very old metaphor, and we are a little bit in a different dimension as the girl that was flying over, no? And so what I see with my futurist eyes is that before everything, there is a change. And this change we can only achieve through experience, is a change in perception, in consciousness, and in culture. Because unless we touch this, none of the possibilities will happen. And this is only through experience. And that what is difficult is that when people don't see what you're seeing, they say, this is not real. This doesn't exist. So there is not, and it's easier in a way to think about technology. And it's easier in a way to think long-term, what will we do in Mars? But it's more difficult to think, what will I do with my neighbor now? Or with my senses now? So the thing is how we can do both, because it's not or, but it's and. And I think this question of turning from a way of thinking that is or, what do I do, this or that, to a way of thinking that is and that understand everything as a complement. Now, this is for me is yin yang. So whenever I do this, it's this Escher picture where one hand draws the other. And so if we, as futurists, who could develop a new sense in humans, not by technology, but through experience and culture, because now we have 5 or maybe 6 senses, probably the 7th could be the ability to, at the same time, be aware of me and the whole. As a cell that knows that she's a cell, and she knows that she is also a part of a big organism. If this ability was possible, and you could lend your eyes, Roger gave us a lot of his perspectives, but I would like to ask you, and you too, Roger, if you could share one thing that you see, and this thing related to choices, so that you could lend your eyes to help people develop this ability of being aware, of being interdependent part of an organism. What would you give as an eye? So this is a question I don't know if I could express properly, but this is a question for the 3 of you. If we had this ability to share our eyes and to share a vision so that we could make better choices in this direction of becoming us, now me and us simultaneously, what would you share? One thing. Does anyone want to start? It's a game.
I can try it.
Okay.
I think what you're saying really relates to our sense of empathy, and I like to come back in the past to kind of project what could be in the future. And when we study the evolution of our brain, it's quite interesting. And Michio Kaku divided it. He's a futurist physician. He divided it like with different level of consciousness, and I believe that empathy kind of arrived in the latest stage of our consciousness. And that's probably the sense of us that can be related to what you're saying and to empathy at the same time. And when I try to do that exercise of the future, I'm wondering, are we going to be more empathetic or less empathetic? One issue I see, and I don't want to focus too much on the negative aspect, but we see more and more like dirigents, people leading countries with less empathy. But I have to believe that in the US, we have kind of switched this year with a more empathetic president. But the question is, in the future, will we have more empathetic leaders or less empathetic leaders? If we have more empathetic leaders, and I think it starts with the top of our nations and governments, then I believe we can start building that type of future. But I also kind of believe that being a leader, sometimes you have to make hard decisions that are easier to make when you are more on the psychopathic side. But I'm wondering, like, you want me to give a picture of the future? I'm wondering if maybe in thousands and thousands of years, we will have two human species, like one will be the empath and one will be the psychopath. And I'm really wondering what that could lead to, like a sense of us on the one hand and more wars and more egos on the other hand. Well, just throwing a few ideas here. I'm happy to hear your reactions.
Thank you. Interesting.
I think I can go. I love that. Like two humans, one with the empath possibility of leading. I'm hoping for that. Actually, I think I'm working myself on that too. I think I could give the people my visual around human technology. We are so connected to synthetic or silicon technology, like artificial intelligence gonna lead the future. Yeah, part of it. I think they're gonna replace us on every single job or every single motion or movement we do, like machines. So the part of the day you are used as machine, please let the artificial intelligence or the automation with robots come and take it for good. But on the other hand, what's the human technology we're going to have time to develop? I think intuition is the linear, you know, synthetic technology in artificial intelligence, human technology compared to that line, it's going to be intuition. We are going to be able to have more time to develop that. If we go to, for example, immersive realities, okay, I think we're going to buy those kind of things, thinking that is a video game or this kind of entertainment, but we're going to have a door, you know, a door to the internet. We're going to feel the world through those doors, and probably you're going to have synthetic memories because of that. Your senses are going to be there too, but you're going to have forever the notion that this synthetic immersive reality does not compare with the real life reality, because you cannot feel the life, you cannot receive the nutrition, like you cannot feed yourself with this kind of artificial immersive reality. So I think if you compare immersive reality, you're going to have nature reality more and more being something from the future that we are going to look for. And at 30 technology, if we could say that, you're going to be able to read code. Maybe part of the people are going to be studying code, but I truly believe also that the machines are going to code better than us in the future. But are you going to be able to read energy more than codes? And I think this is going to be this human technology. And there is a much more technology inside this human technology I could talk. But I think those three: intuition, your ability of get back to nature and natural, and your ability to read energy and people and feel the others. It's pretty connected to what Lala said on the fourth dimension, or Sylvia said with empathic, and I don't know, the other group. I don't even want to say the name of them, because I think we give force and power to them. But I think those are my views to the future.
Wonderful. Roger, would you like to add something aside from what you already said?
Yeah, no, I mean, first just to say that I find it very interesting what Sylvia and Lydia are talking about, which seem to be looking at the future, which actually, like many of these things, so much of it is not that futuristic, because the topics around what virtual reality and empathetic, and the distortions, and when everything is amplified in today's world, it suddenly becomes today's reality to a degree. So I think these are scary and for some of them, but wonderful opportunities for the others in terms of the the empathy and the sort of thinking about, I forget the term Lydia used, but I think it was about nature, virtual nature, or is that the term you used?
No, it's the real nature. Let's get back to the real nature.
Yeah, sorry. You're so immersed in virtual, etc., that you're then kind of using to get back to real nature, which should be the current state, which it isn't necessarily. And so I can see the world as you move towards more immersion and the metaverse and all, and the virtual worlds, that you're then having to kind of find that true nature and the real nature. So I think those are all very interesting. I think one of the things I like to see, and to answer your question, I guess, Lala, around, what would be that, magic tool or that magic wand or whatever. In a way, for me, it's sense making in the broadest possible sense. And it includes a lot of what, Sylvia was talking about, empathy and all that. Sense making is really having a sense of the environment and understanding how interconnected everything is, having the empathy that's required. And I think really sense making, unless you have a sense of how things are connected, what's required, the impact you have, the intended and unintended consequences, you can't make sense of that. And the problem, and I think the difficulty, which you all alluded to, is in that sense making, you're thinking about something that is immediate and present, but it's not disconnected from the future. And so it's kind of the reconciling and the bridge making between the sense making and then what you actually do with it and the decisions you make, but with a broad immersion in terms of the impact you have and how integrated you are into an ecosystem, the how hyper connected everything is. And so that for me is really the tricky bit, to make sense of all that. And then what do you do about it once you've made sense? But I do believe that sense making is a little bit the prerequisite. Unless you have a sense of those dynamics or environment or whatever you call it, it's a bit tricky to kind of think about anything else if you don't have a sense of that, if you don't get that.
Wonderful. I totally agree with you. And it's interesting because the moment we need more sense making, we escape in the direction of less senses and less perception. It's natural, because when it's difficult to sense, we escape.
Yeah.
But unless we become aware of this and we balance a little bit how we escape, in Brazil we would say one caipirinha and one meditation, and a little bit of everything. If I could share my eyes, one of the things I would like to share is the perception. It's all about sense making, that there are resources that we don't know. I started in the arts, then I started working with companies and governments and so on. And always the problem is, how do we do this? We don't have resources. We don't have money. What about the GDP and so on? And actually, there are resources beyond money. But it's super interesting because those resources are a kind of gray rhino. I love this expression you have, because they're huge and they're very explicit. But as we are looking in the distance, trying to find more money, we don't see them here. And so one thing that I feel is that we must pay attention when we think and we work with future, that in order not to be blind, but the things that are very close. But if our focus is far away, we won't see them. It's an experiment. If we put a hand in front of the eyes and look at the line in the palm hand, we don't see the background. But if we focus on the background, we don't see the hand. So what is very clear now And when everything changes, what are the things that don't change? So actually, I'm working more on tools and technologies, because the knowledge and the tools, the method I already have is this Fluxonomy 4D, to notice and to transaction resources beyond money, cultural, environmental, social, and time. And this is what I would like to share. My eyes that see abundance, and my eyes that see that collaboration, it's not a sweet, lovely thing, oh, let's collaborate, but it's the way of dealing with exponentiality. No one will handle exponentiality without converging in collaboration. So those are the things I would like to share. I think we are approaching the end of our meeting. We can, I think, have another 14, 15 minutes. So it would be interesting to hear from you. How would you like to close? And if you don't have something to say, I have a question. And the question is, you may ignore my question if there is something else you would like to say. And the question is about bridges. I loved your infinite bridge. I love it. And I think the question now, since we have everything, but we don't have the convergency between, things are very polarized instead of integrating. And I think we need a lot of bridges, because we talk a lot of the bridge between human and technology, but we are not talking about the other bridges. For instance, the bridge of between the people who design new things and the business people who are afraid. They are always afraid one from the other. So which kind of bridge would you consider more urgent in this, and more useful, or more powerful in this moment?
It's a great question for all of us, I assume.
Yep. And then we can answer, and also if there is something else you would like to add. We have like 3-4 minutes for each of us.
Anyone want to give it a shot, or I'm happy to. But...
Go ahead.
So I think it's probably a theme which is dear to all of us because of the nature of our interest in relation to the future. But I think it's really bridging the future and the present. And I find it very surprising having, this is a new focus for me over the past few years. Prior to that, I was spending more time in the corporate world, and including in the boardrooms and advising, leadership teams. I find it amazing how much of the world, companies, governments, treat these as separate things, like, oh, a choice between the future and the present, without understanding how closely they're linked. And so for me, it's really that it boils down to that, bridging the future and the present, and understanding that, when you're thinking about the future, it's in order to inform your present decisions, and the present decisions you're making, by definition, are directly impacting the future, whether it's the immediate future, medium future, or longer term future. And so that disconnect and the lack of that bridge, I think, is the most serious thing there is. And it's just, and I understand why it is. I think personally, if I were to give one reason, it's just simply incentives. When the world is incentivized to think about the next few quarters or years or the next political mandate, they will ignore the rest, because, I think Munger, who says, show me the incentives and I'll tell you the outcomes. So the world is incentivized to not have that bridge in place, and so they don't. But anyway.
Great. Any other bridge?
Maybe I'll try another bridge. Recently, I've been talking with other futurists about the future of wars and the wars of the future. And we try to approach it with a philosophical angle. And I do believe that there are bridges to make between philosophers and leaders conducting wars. of course, that seems like an easy thing to say. But I'm trying to project the future of war, and once again, trying to look back what happened, for example, in the 19th century. We kind of went from real murderous wars to a more virtual war, or at least projected in other fields, like, for example, the space conquest, trying to find new ways to battle without making so many dead people. There was also the war that happened with the Olympic Games. So that was also a real tool, actually, for nations to kind of battle on another field. We had chess war also, probably between the Russia and the United States indirectly. So what I think when I cross that kind of trend with what happens with the metaverse, I'm thinking, why couldn't we have war that are completely virtual? I mean, you could have leaders from states imagining to conduct wars just through video games and without any real impact on the world. So that's something I'm trying to imagine right now. And you are talking about a positive future. That's probably one I would like to see happen, when the leaders just conduct war that are absolutely virtual. And I don't care how many virtual dead people they make if it's all just virtual. So I think there could be interesting focus here to have. And if I may, I just want to mention that with Rom Gayoso, Chris Meyer, who are interested in that field, we have launched a meetup, Philosophy of the Futures, that I really invited you to join. It's supported by the Association of Professional Futurists. And our first topic will be actually about the future of wars. So I hope we can continue the conversation with those interested.
Super invitation. Wonderful.
Well, my bridges are make the invisible visible. I think we need more bridges to this invisible world. We all assume and we all understand and believe that machines need energy to work. And we definitely need to assume that we are all made of energy. Nikola Tesla used to say that if you want to understand the world, you need to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibrations. And we definitely need to open that boxes beyond spirituality and beyond all these questions that it's like wrapped as a faith. And if the machines need energy to work, good ones, powerful ones, we also need. So that's my bridge.
Wonderful. It's interesting because as we can experience beings, how it is like to be a being of light, for instance. Now we are beings of light here. It's not something mystical. We are bits through space. And information is in the cloud. So maybe we can think, wow, if the information is in the cloud, maybe there's information in the cloud that I can access in other ways. Or, there is an app. Maybe there are some apps in me that I could choose. So I hope that that in the future we become more and more co-creators of our reality than victims. I hope this is the ending point of what we are going through. And sometimes I think I love Star Trek. Unfortunately, I have a daughter and not a son, because if not, he might be named Spock, which wouldn't be very interesting. And in Star Trek, there is holodeck, and then you have an experience in this virtual space. So maybe through all that is happening, we'll finally come to the conclusion that this universe is already a hologram, as Leonard Susskind puts it, a physicist seriously proposing it. And then we can create, we can reprogram things. Let's change the program in the holodeck. And in order to be able to change the programs in the holodeck, my bridge now, thinking in short term, not in what's now being a problem, I think it's the bridge between, I think always it's a matter of trust and language, because I think trust follows the ability to understand each other. And I don't think I see, and I think we all futurists see that for the first time in history, we have the means, we have the people, we have the knowledge, we have technology, we have resources to do whatever is needed. We just don't see, and so we don't choose. And in order to achieve this, I think we must integrate again the yin yang, what I called project land and business land. So it's the land of or the world where the creators and the designers of solutions live, and the world of businessmen who are able to implement, because it's two different natures. Now it's 40 years I'm working in advising, and I clearly see that there are exceptions, but those are two different worlds. And we must bridge them, because if the creators are afraid of businessmen and vice versa, we won't profit of all the opportunities that we have. So this is the bridge I'm very much engaged in building. Which kind of language, which kind of tools in order for us to become more integrated and work together. So, dear ones, I think we came to an end. As Sylvia made an invitation, would you like to invite our delightful public to something? The audience that is with us. Do you want to make an invitation, a suggestion, a goodbye? No? Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Maria and André. Congratulations for this year of this wonderful and very necessary project of yours. And please count on us so that together we can build this future that is desirable and possible. Bye.
Thank you, Roger, Lala, Ligia, and Sylvia, for such an inspiring discussion. And for everyone that was listening, so what's your bridge? Just write it down on our chat. We'd love to have a better understanding on what's your mind after listening to all those amazing conversations.